What could possibly justify the sacrifice of one's own child? The Greeks struggled with this question through the story of Agamemnon and Iphigenia. As you may recall from your study of ancient Greek myths and legends, Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, who rallies the Greek heroes to sail to Troy for the Trojan War. Unfortunately, on his way to Troy, Agamemnon accidentally kills a stag, sacred to the goddess of the hunt, Artemis. And Artemis retaliates by turning the winds against the Greek ships. Without favorable winds, the Greeks were stuck on the shore as the weeks went by and their supplies ran out. Eventually, one of the Greek seers reveals that in order to appease the goddess, Agamemnon must sacrifice his eldest daughter, Iphigenia, something he initially resists but eventually does. But was the Trojan War worth the death of an innocent girl? The Greek tragic playwrights made much of this story, of the agonizing decision of a king and father stuck between country and family, of a mother who cannot forgive her husband for sacrificing her daughter, of the daughter herself who must struggle with the realization that she is about to die at the hands of her father. Did the honor of Greece outweigh the life of Iphigenia? Could victory at Troy justify her death at the hands of Agamemnon? The Jews also address this question in the story of Abraham and Isaac, though with far less hand-wringing than the Greeks. The Jews, of course, are not dealing with capricious pagan gods whose demands may or may not be justified. The Jews are dealing with the one omnipotent God, the creator of the universe. When this God asks something, one does not question the demand. It must be a justified demand, and it must be obeyed. And the Jews are not entirely wrong. In the case of Agamemnon, the purpose of the Trojan War was to preserve Greek honor, something of utmost importance in the ancient world, but something which is still somewhat prideful and self-serving. In a sense, Iphigenia was the victim of her father's ego. But Abraham has nothing to gain through the sacrifice of Isaac. The only desire Abraham ever expressed, after all, was the desire to have a child with his wife Sarah. That child was Isaac. By killing this child, Abraham is losing the very thing he had hoped to gain by following God. The sacrifice of Isaac is certainly a far purer sacrifice, since it is in no way rooted in self-interest, but only in obedience to God. Again, though, we have to ask ourselves, is such a sacrifice justified? Can we say that Abraham was right to sacrifice Isaac just because God asked him to do so? Soren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, wrote a famous essay on exactly this question. Kierkegaard contended that Abraham could not justify the sacrifice of his son under any rational moral framework. No reasonable person could ever say that Abraham was justified in killing his son. And yet, the omnipotent creator of the universe also deserves our absolute obedience. So Abraham had to follow through out of faith. In fact, we might say fidelity to God is the only thing that could ever justify the sacrifice of one's own child. which is why we are so thankful that in the resolution to this story, God makes clear that he does not, and by implication will never, demand child sacrifice. And yet, even while God's salvation of Isaac from the blade is still fresh on our minds, the Church gives us a second reading in which St. Paul reminds us that God did not spare his own Son. Even though God does not demand child sacrifice from us, he still sacrifices his own Son for the sake of all of humanity. Again, the question of this homily is what could possibly justify the sacrifice of one's own child? And in the case of Jesus, what could possibly justify the sacrifice of the eternal, only begotten Son of God, the greatest and most perfect sacrifice possible? Apparently, in the mind of God, it is you. You are somehow worth the death of his Son on the cross. Your salvation is the one thing that compelled God to sacrifice his own child. Which prompts a final question. Do you believe that you are worth it? Do you believe that you are worth the sacrifice of the Son of God? Because God says that you are worth it, and there's no arguing with him. You are worth more than the Trojan War. You are worth more than a great nation as numerous as the stars. Your ransom was paid by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. God sacrificed his own Son for you.